I want to say thank you for this opportunity of being able to come and just to share. What I'm basically going to do tonight is give you a little bit of my story. We all have stories, and I don't want in any way to imply that my story is more important than anybody else's story, but it's important to me because it's the journey that I'm on. And so I find it such a privilege of being able to be invited to say, come and share with us a little bit what has happened in your life. And I want to just introduce myself a little bit, just to know who I am. My name is Kelton Black, and usually when you meet folk and you start to talk with them, they usually come up with two questions. At least they do with me. They usually say, where did you get that name from? Kelton. You don't see it on mugs or cards easily. And the second question they usually ask is, after they hear me speak for a few minutes, where are you from? Trying to pick out my accent and understand where I'm from. And those two, if I deal with those two questions now, it'll save you thinking about them any longer. My name was given to me by my mother. As simple as that. No, it's a Scottish origin, and my mum used a family name. And actually it's a surname that I use as my first name. And I thank God for that unique name that God has given me. And I'm glad that it marks my life of God's special plan for me as well. But also, where am I from? I've traveled up today from Somerset. Been living there now for 50 years. And before that, I was in the US of A. I was born just south of Milwaukee and moved to the UK when I was 9 years old. My family moved here as well. I didn't come here on my own. We moved here. My parents felt led to come here. My dad was Scottish and was coming back home. And so that's how my life 50 years ago was changed and moved into where I am. And I've stayed down in Somerset all these years. But I just want today to share a little bit about my life, about my story. But really, I don't want to boast anything, because anything that I am, and anything that's happened, and anything that I would class as success, I have to acknowledge that God has given me people around me that have actually inputted into my life. And I'm so grateful for that. And so I stand here filled with hope, although there was many reasons not to have that hope all the time. I stand here and declare that I've learned what it is to understand faith. I think I've got small faith, but God says all you need is little faith, and that's enough. And so I'm just glad that God has blessed me with some faith, that I'm able to experience the things that I have. A little bit about myself. I would class myself as a quick learner. I got married 34 years ago, and my first week of marriage I learned several things. The first meal that my wife prepared for me was fried eggs. And I loved that. That was just one of my favorites. And when it arrived on my plate, I looked at it and it wasn't quite how my mum used to make it. I don't know if you know where I'm going with this. I sort of said to Sharon, I said, oh, your eggs. How do you do that? And she said, well, what's wrong? I said, no, there's nothing really wrong. I said, they're a little bit crispy on the outside. The yolk is very good, but it's a little bit crispy on the outside. Ever since that time, I have made the eggs. Anytime we've had eggs, I've been drafted into the kitchen, and if I'm not there to make the eggs, then we don't have eggs. Week 1. At the end of the first week, I'll just give you another insight of how I learned. The first laundry that we did, it came back, and I went to my wardrobe to take out my trousers, and I looked and saw they were creased down the sides on each edge and across the front. No pleat at the front. And I just mentioned this to Sharon. I said, oh, how do you iron that? And she said, that's how my mother does it. I said, but really the crease should be down the middle. I have ironed my trousers for 34 years. Everything else gets ironed and laundered, but trousers are my affair. I tell you what, after these 2 incidents, after week 2, everything's been perfect. Everything's been fantastic. And I'm so grateful that we have those experiences. I stand here as a grandfather, and I look at my life and I realize that I've learned a few things. And really tonight, as I share my story, I hope that I might share some of the things I've learned along the way. And as a grandfather, I was just a few months ago, I was talking to my grandson, who's coming up to 6 years old, and he was asking, Grampy, how old are you? And you know how those great curiosities, and he's comparing me with his mum and all, he's getting all these ages of whatever he is. And I said, I'm 59. And he said, wow, he said, that's good. He said, how old are you going to be next year? And I said, well, 59 this year means I'm 60 next year. He looked at me, he says, Grampy, that's old. I'm not sure how 59 is okay, but 60 becomes old. Now, some of you might know what that means and understand and relate to that. Well, you know, I've learned these things along the way that, you know, isn't the number of years that really matter. It's what happens in those years. And I'm so grateful that God has blessed me. I've got a wonderful wife. I've got 2 lovely daughters. I've now got 3 grandchildren, 2 twin granddaughters who are just turned 2, and this grandson of 5 who I just feel just so blessed to have. Now, you know, our life, we look at that, and I stand here and, you know, smile on my face and a hope in my heart and faith believing that things are right. But I know we go through things. My life hasn't always been as I stand here tonight. I know what it is to go to work and hear that I've made redundant. I know what it is to go to work and hear that I've been promoted. Have a career, develop, but each side, the 2 options. Not knowing if we were going to keep our house. The mortgage was due and we didn't have the finances. I know what it is to stand in that place and wonder what's going to happen. And then I had times when we had surplus that we were able to have the joy of being able to bless others and to share that. And so the joys of my life are mixed in that respect, touching on many, many experiences. And I'm so grateful for that journey we've been on. And you know, God has given each of us a unique journey. And I'm so grateful to be able to share a little bit of my story. And I hope tonight that what you hear me say will not be in any way to look on me and find favor, but to look on the one that's blessed me. And the testimony I have, the story that I have, is saying God has proven himself to be faithful to me. And so as I look at my story and the highs and lows and the learning, the growing, all those things are great. But really, you know, after you have those things, many people looked at my life and they said, Kelton, it's all right for you. You have found the favor. You found the success, even through the low times. And you know, I could testify that everything seemed right. Well, I just want to share a little bit of my testimony, because really what I'm going to share about happened only started 3 years ago in 2014. Everything was going well. Things were developing well. It's not so much what I was doing as a job, but you know, my life was actually being blessed. I felt the joy of having success in some measure. I'm not wealthy in that respect, but I'm successful in the sense of being able to provide for my family. But then, on the end of August, I felt a little complaint as I swallowed. And so I decided, after it persisted a little while, to go to the doctor. And the only complaint I had was that, and I just felt to go to the doctor. And I went to the doctor at the end of August, and I said to them, I said, could you get me checked? Because I've got this little complaint. And the doctor said, well, why should we? Really, it's only a small complaint. It could be a variety of things. I explained that my brother had cancer 3 years previously, and I just said, just get me checked. And I remember now, they sent me for the scope, and when I saw the scope and they took photographs and took biopsies, I knew from the doctor that things weren't good. And by that Thursday on Tuesday the 8th of September 2014, I had the news from the doctor, you've got cancer. And you know that is quite a statement, and I know there's many in this room perhaps have understood what that, when you're in the middle of journeying a way that seems very successful, to have that statement presented to you. Well, I'm so grateful that I have a family around me, loved ones and folk that I could look to. But I want to tell you, that day, remember, that sticks in my mind. It was 4 days before my youngest daughter's wedding. And my wife and I, after we heard the news, decided we wouldn't say anything because we didn't have all the details. It was just their first decision of what they'd seen. And so we decided to keep it to ourselves until after the wedding of my youngest daughter. And so we have this news, and I want to tell you, I'm a man of faith. I'm a man who, you know, have seen great things, God do things. But I tell you something, when you get that news, it knocks you to a place of reality. And I can tell you, I actually spent 3 days. Some of those days, when everybody was out, I cried a bit, as you might understand. I wasn't sorry for myself. I had learned something in that, even that moment, that I think is very profound. I can honestly say to you, I wasn't afraid to die. And I know that because my thoughts were not about me dying. My thoughts were about my grandson, about my family, and all those things were flooding into my mind. And then I thought, Lord, you're a healer. You're able to do amazing things. I've seen miracles happen. And so my thoughts would race this way. Well, perhaps this is just a momentary thing that you're going to do a miracle and I'm going to have a testimony that's going to be able to, really shake our town, and they'll realize that something wonderful has happened. And yet I had this reality. The doctors were saying, it's severe. We don't know whether we can treat it, but we're going to do our best. And so 3 days I wrestled with God. I said, Lord, if you want me, I'm ready to go home. But Lord, I've got some things that I still want to sort. And I had these thoughts racing back and forth. I want to tell you, they only lasted 3 days. I was making all sorts of arrangements in my mind, how I would do this, how I'd plan this whole, sign everything up and make sure everything was, watertight and fit for my family. That responsibility was on me to feel I had to do that. And I found myself at the end of 3 days, just before my daughter's wedding, I woke up that morning and I had a tremendous peace that I just couldn't explain. That I thought, Lord, I'm not afraid to go. I'm ready to go. But there's something within me says, I don't need to worry. This is not unto death. I can't explain that. I can't give you a formula or a secret about it. I'm just telling you how it was. After 3 days of probably praying more than sort of 14 hours a day, because I just stood aside. I didn't do anything except just be at home and prepare for test after test after test that was being signed up for. And I just know that I woke up that morning and I was just overtaken by a peace that said everything's going to be okay. And I stood there thinking, okay, this is going to be this scenario where a week down the road I go for my next test and they're going to say it's gone. They'll have the photographs of it one moment, and the next moment they're going to look and say, whoa, how did that happen? I went to my first test and they said, it's really serious. We don't know whether chemotherapy, we don't know if surgery is possible. We've got some more tests. So I went for another scan, another place, and the next week was again, and the appointment came about another 7 days later. I was back at the specialist and they had all the results back, and again I was coming with optimism. I said, Lord, this is it. I'm going to hear this news, and no, we're going to have to go for surgery. We're going to start chemotherapy straight away. And I prayed with my wife about this, and we said, we believe God is our healer. But whatever the doctors want to do, we had a peace in our heart, let them do. So any tests they want to do, we'll let them do those tests. Any medicine they want to give me, we'll take that medicine. And we'll believe that God is going to be our healer and bring us through. We'd already agreed that. Sharon and myself, the first time we prayed that. And we were confident that was what we should do in our circumstance. Please, I'm not implying this is how everyone should go down the road. This is what we did. This is my story of what God impressed upon me. And so I'm so grateful that we agreed that. And so they said we're going to start chemotherapy. It's going to be very severe. We have to really attack this hard. And so it was going to be 9 weeks every day with chemo. And they said it's going to be tough, but unless we do it this way, we don't think there's any chance of us doing that. But remember, I got in the back of my mind, everything's going to be okay. One of these next tests, so I started chemotherapy. I was in my first 3-week cycle. I went in for my blood test, and I was coming home thinking, great, we're on the phase 2. We only got 2 more of the 3-week sessions to go. We're going to be great. Thank you so much. And I thought, this is going to work out good. And so the next time that we have results back, they're going to see that it's been totally transformed. I always believe this is going to be the best story in Highbridge and Burnham-on-Sea. Since all the things, since they took the train away, all those stuff in the town, there'll be news that would break the city. I want to tell you, when I got back from that blood test, I'd started my second lot of chemo, I had an urgent phone call from the hospital. Are you okay? Can you get back into hospital straight away? I said, well, I've just got home. I was only home 45 minutes. I said, my daughter's still here. She can bring me back in. And I said, sure, we'll come back. What's the problem? They said, your blood sugars are absolutely through the roof. We are very concerned for your well-being. I said, how are you feeling? I said, I got no headache. They asked me all these questions. Do you have this, that, and the other? I said, no, I'm feeling fine. So my daughter took me back into the oncology unit, and I walked in there. I could see the expression on their face. They did not believe that I'd walked into that hospital. They sat me down and they did another blood test. This time the machine said it couldn't read it. It was too high to read on their machine they had in the oncology unit. And so I looked at the paperwork, and she had written down, my blood test came back. I don't know if anybody knows about blood sugars. It should have been between 5 and 7 is about normal, and it fluctuates between there. It was 42.9. And they said I learned later, anything over 30 is life-threatening. And I stood there not feeling any symptoms, but yet they were telling me the situation was worse. It was critical. I may not even get through chemotherapy because diabetes, the sugar levels, was enough to do a problem. So they were anxious. They worked on me all day. And by 6 o'clock, they got my blood sugars down to 26. I was getting injections virtually every half hour. They were coming in with different doses and trying to sort it out. I was sat in the waiting room, and the clinic was closing, and I was with the doctor who was going to release me at the end of the time. The specialist said to me, look, we'll plan to send you home and you'll come back tomorrow. I heard them. I was the only one in the waiting room. And when you're the only one in the waiting room and you hear conversations about him and what we're going to do, you realize they're talking about you. And so I found myself listening, and they're saying, we can't send him home. But they said we should send him home and he'll come back tomorrow. No, he says, it's all right. We have to keep him here, and we'll have to find a bed for him or whatever. They came back out and checked me for temperature. They checked me for how I was feeling, any headaches, and was I thirsty? Did I need to go to the toilet? They were asking all these questions. I said, no, I'm fine. I'm feeling okay. And they were probably a bit skeptical. And after 3 times of coming back and forth in about 20 minutes, they said, we're trying to decide whether to send you home or to keep you here. If you'll promise us that you're okay, and if you have any symptoms of headaches or troubles, you'll come straight back in. We'll send you home, but you've got to come back first thing in the morning, and we'll continue treatment. And I said, sure, I'll do that. And they sent me home. And the next morning I came back in, and I spoke to Jane, the specialist. I said, they argued whether they were going to send me home. And she said, I had asked them to send you home because she says, if you're put on a ward, you're in the first phase of chemotherapy, your resistance is low, you're at more risk in the hospital of catching something. And she said, I felt to send you home, you'd be at less risk. And I thank God, along the journey, God puts people in the right place, looking after my welfare. I hadn't got the news I wanted, but I had news that God was on the case. He was working in a situation. And so I went to the next phase, and the whole thing, I completed my whole 9 weeks, and then they were talking about surgery. But right at the end of the 9 weeks, I had another strange phone call after a scan that I had. And they came and they rang me 3 o'clock in the morning, a doctor who said, this is Dr. So-and-so from the A&E surgery in Weston. And I thought somebody had been sick, and as a pastor, you sometimes have to be called in, or I thought maybe my family members were there at the A&E and needed someone to come in. They said, no, it's about you. I've had the notes put on my desk from your last scan, and we're very concerned. Are you okay? And they started asking these strange questions again. I thought my sugar's under control because I took tests myself and had that under wraps at that time. But they said, well, you've got a double blood clot on the lungs. And we're very concerned. You need to come in now. If you need an ambulance, we'll bring you in now. But please don't rush around. We're very concerned. It's a saddled embolism or whatever over the lung arteries there. And they said, we need you in. And I said, they said, are you okay? I said, I've just come downstairs to answer the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning. I said, I feel okay. Similar to the other one, I went in, they allowed me to go in the next morning. They walked me up and down that corridor. They were asking me sorts of questions. Are you tired yet? Are you out of breath yet? And all their paperwork was saying I had these blood clots, but I was walking in my own experience as if I had nothing. And I said, do you know that looks like that I've got someone on my case? God is proving himself. Yes, that cancer's still there. It looks like it's still in that situation. They're talking about surgery, but I have a feeling, and you know how that feeling is? I think God is doing something special here. Everyone else was bewildered by it, but I was excited by it because I felt I've got someone working on my case. The peace was still in my heart. They were talking about surgery. They postponed it because of the blood clots, and eventually surgery was scheduled. And the doctor sat with me and Sharon I had several appointments where many were cancelled, but mine was kept. All the way through, I had little things that were just giving me inspiration that God was still on the case. I was still wanting. I was still longing. Oh, could they find a scan and say, it's now gone. But we got to surgery that morning, and we sat there with the bed. I had the gown that does all the revealing stuff, and I was sat there all prepared and ready, had my socks and things they'd given me to wear, like they do with these things. And the doctor says, I want to tell you, the surgeon was saying, we don't know how this is going to turn out. We're going in, we've got the scans, we can't be certain where it's attached, where it's growing. It's right on the joint between the esophagus and the stomach. We know it's there, but we don't know the extent. We're going to go in, and we may find out we can't do anything. And we'll just sew you back up, and then we'll take action that way. Or we might be able to do something, but it may be there's still attachments that we can't get free. Or we might, the third was, we'll be able to have enough tissue and be able to do it successfully. That's our options today. But he said, I want to be honest, and said, Mrs. Black, I want to be honest with you. We don't know how this is going to happen. Now, they have to do that. But for a wife who's sitting there with her husband, that's not the best to encourage them and make them have a good day. She had to leave me as I was whisked through the double doors and had to go home, and she had folk there that were going to be with her all day. And I'm so grateful that 6 o'clock that night, the surgeon personally ran my wife and said, it's been absolutely successful. We had all the tissue we needed to. We've removed it. We believe we've done a good job. And I was on the mend. They said, expect about 3 weeks to be in hospital, and then you'll be home, and then it'll be recovery. Another bout of chemotherapy was booked, and that was their plan. And I was coming out of that. I came out of surgery, and they were expecting me to be a week on intensive care. After 2 days, I was clear. All my pipes were drying up. All my tubes, I looked like an octopus with all the bottles, and some were going in, some were going out. And I was in that. Some of it I wasn't aware of, but I was so grateful that God helped me along that journey. Yeah. And there, as I made that 2 days, they wanted to find me a bed on the ward, well early of what they planned. I got on the ward, and they gave me this sort of task. They said, if you can eat and feed yourself, because I was on like soups and fed through a tube, and then they said, if you can eat and keep food down in any form, that's one thing. If you can go to the toilet yourself, excuse me for using that phrase, but they said, if you can do all this by yourself, we'll send you home. That was my goal, to be able to do that. And so I'm so grateful that after 7 days being on the ward, 10 days after my surgery, I completed all the tasks. I ticked off that I was success on those, and they sent me home. Amen. Way early, 10 days after the way. I felt evidence in my mind and my heart God was on my case. Yeah. And I stand here grateful because I've sat and ministered and served with families who in this same period have lost loved ones through the same complaint I had. I know I'm standing here testifying God has been my helper. Yes. And I stand here and say, Lord, my story is God has proven himself to be real to me. I'm not here to say I'm anything special, but I want to tell you every day is a day that I say, thank you, Lord, for your grace for me, the undeserved favor of God. And I journeyed and I got recovery. They said, don't, expect to be back on your feet or back to work within a year. Please take it steady. You've had major surgery. Within 2 months, I was in Hungary. I went there for a bit of a rest, but we ended up planting a church in 3 days because I went to a man who was also in hospital. Elisha, Cliff knows Elisha. We went there and he came to me after that point. I went there for these 4 days just to sit with him. He was in hospital with dialysis and problems, and so I went to the church. Thought it was good for me to go and have a little break, and if I was out the way I wouldn't get involved with church work or whatever back at home. And I got there to visit him and just sit by his bedside for 3 days. He had different ideas. He had planned that he could book out of hospital, and both of us traveled to about an hour from Budapest, and we went and we met this family, gathered. We thought we were going to meet a family, ended up 40 people in the room, and we were sharing about who is God, what is the church about, what is the message, the plan of God for mankind. And we shared that on day one. We had to get back to the hospital because Elisha had to check in again, and they said, could you come back tomorrow? We went back the next day, and we shared about the book of Acts and said, this is how God, although he created everything and his plan, he now has a plan that he lives inside human beings and does amazing things to those that will believe. And I used the book of Acts to share what God could do in a life that was believing God in everyday life. And we shared, they said, could you come back tomorrow? We came back on the Friday morning, And this time they stopped me. I didn't have a chance to go into my preach. They said, we've got some questions. They asked me, the first question they asked me was, what's the name of God? What's his name? And I thank God for such an opportunity. God just inspired me and said, well, it goes right back to the beginning. He is the creator. He is the Elohim. He's the El Shaddai to Abraham. He was the deliverer to those in the lion's den. And I went through and used all the names I could think of. The healer, the strength in the wilderness. All those things I gave the whole I am that I am. Statements that were there. And I said, and in these last days, he's revealed who he is in the person of Jesus Christ. Amen. And I shared that truth, and 12 of them gave their heart to the Lord. Amen. 6 of them were main people that were there. And they're established a church. And there's still a church there. We go back now. And last time we were there, we helped with a baptism that was there. And the church is there growing in the village. There's now 5 churches around those areas. Amen. All because God is a faithful God. And I stand here saying, Lord has restored me. When I was just recovering last year, my wife had news she had cancer. She had found a lump. And so last September, we went through again this whole story of, Lord, you're a helper, you're our strength. So the turn was no longer me, because I was pronounced clear. I then journeyed through her chemotherapy, through her treatment. And I want to praise God. 6 weeks ago, she went back to work. The lump is gone. They've said they don't want to see her for 6 months. And God has been good. This is my story. I take no credit, because I'm not the one that had great faith. All I had was a moment saying, I'm going to believe you, whichever way this turns out. Yes. And I had a peace in my heart that was able to say, you're on my side, Lord. Yes. And you know, I stand here after all these years of understanding. The greatest learning is, God is my helper. Yes. And tonight I would testify to you that if you have a need, yours might be different than mine, but I want to tell you, God loves you as much as he loves me. I've got no special points with God for the way I live. Some people looked at my life and they said, you know, you're serving in the church. Isn't it a bit unfair that God would let you go through that? I want to tell you, there was nothing unfair. There was nothing fair about life. There was nothing unfair of what happened to me. All I know is God stepped in and proved himself to be faithful to me. And I would encourage you, whatever your faith level is, whatever your experience is, I want to tell you, there is a hope. Do you know, many years ago, I came to the Lord, gave my life to Christ when I was 17 years old. And I surrendered my life and said, Lord, you've got my life. Now, there's been times I've taken that promise back and tried to do it myself. Then there's been other times where I've resurrendered my life afresh. But God has never failed me over all that time. And I stand here and I realize there was 2 verses of Scripture that I had as a young man. The first one was found in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8. That wonderful verse says, when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, you shall be my witnesses, both in Jerusalem, into Judea and Samaria, even to the ends of the earth. Now, I don't know, as a young man, I had a fresh revelation. Because many times I've heard it preached and it was talking about our witnesses. We're going to go out and be witnesses and tell other people about Jesus and serve them. But you know, when I read that very first, as about 19 years old, I read that verse. You know what it said to me? You're going to see God do stuff. Because me as a witness is simply you will witness what God is doing. Yes. And I thought that was a wonderful seed thought that was put in my heart as a young man. It shaped my life. Yes. Because my journey is not about going off and doing things for others or trying to achieve anything for God. But I want to see what God is going to do. Yes. And these last 3 years, God has done something more than amazing. Before this time, I would have told you I was a believer. I want to tell you, these last days, since I've been recovering, since I've come through my wife's condition and seen success there, I am fully persuaded that nothing that will happen to us can overtake us without God's stamp of his approval and his help. And I'm so grateful. The second verse that I still reinforce in my life is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. In verse 58 it says, therefore be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, because you know that your labors, your efforts are not in vain. And tonight I would say to you, whatever you're living your life for, if you live it for Jesus, it's not in vain. Amen. If you live it to serve and to occupy in what he is doing, it's not in vain. Amen. And he will give you the strength, even through crises, to be unmovable, unchangeable, steadfast. Nothing can move us. I don't know what the devil had planned for me. I think it wasn't very pleasant. He wanted to wipe out me. He wanted to spoil my family. He wanted to spoil the church. But I'm glad he's not in control of things. I'm glad that God is in control. And his hand was upon me. And you know, we've come through. I'm a stronger person today as I stand here than I was 4 years ago. My family is stronger. I have 2 daughters that still are, you know, they have faith in their heart, but they're not fully active in church. I pray for that. But you know, they're stronger. They've seen me come through this, and they've witnessed our God bring us through even crises of me and my wife, and they've seen God do that. So my children are stronger. I want to tell you, our church is stronger. When I announced my news, the leaders just stood up and said, let us take responsibility of the church. You stand back and get yourself well. And they rose up, and they've been a blessing. They've responded. They've led. Do you know, church is working better now they're doing it than I ever did. God has a way of doing that. You know, sometimes we think we're so, you know, we got it and we're responsible for these hours. But I want to tell you, when we see God at work, he released, our church is stronger. Our church is enabled better than it ever was. So whatever the devil had planned, it's turned around to fulfill that verse. All things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. You know, Joseph said to his brothers, you meant it for evil, but God has meant it for good. Well, I want to tell you, whatever the enemy's thought in my life, whatever the enemy's thinking about your life, we've got a God who says, I'm going to bless you if you put your trust in me. So I want to encourage you. And I stand here, and I really believe, I stand here knowing that I'm healed by the power of God. I thank the God for the doctors. I thank for the journey. I know that the whole process, I stand here completely clear of cancer. And I'm so grateful. And I know that God is my strength. And I want to tell you, I pray earnestly. That instant healing, I still believe in those. I've seen them happen even since this. I've seen others have tremendous healings. We've been praying on the streets. We've been praying in different places. And I've watched and heard as others prayed for folk. Miracles happen instantly. And I'm so grateful to God. But I want to tell you, whether it happens instantly or through the journey, God's hand's upon it. And he's working in your life and mine. And so today, if you don't know Jesus, can I just do this? I invite you, consider Jesus. He's the one who died for you. He's the one who gave himself for you. God loved you so much that he wanted to give all that he had. He gave his only son, that if you believe on him, you can know what it is to have eternal life. You haven't got to earn your salvation. I didn't have to earn anything with God. It's the undeserved favor that he pours out to us. I want to tell you, though, I want to live my life more today for God than I ever did, because I realize every day counts. God's opening doors in Eastern Europe. I'm traveling more. I'm doing things. Doors open. I'm preaching this month 9 times in Pakistan. I'm not traveling there. I'm doing it by Skype. And it's been a tremendous blessing that God's opened there. And God's opening doors of ministry. And where I haven't, the church told me, don't come back and do everything you did before. You're released to help and serve others. And so that's what I've been doing. So I stand here with my story and say, your story can be a story of success and of hope if you put your trust in Jesus. He's there loving you. And whatever your circumstances, whatever your challenges, know the God that I know is faithful, and we are able to look forward. Whatever days I've been given, I'm just grateful that God is walking those with me. And so I'm willing to pray for you. I'm willing to ask God to bring your miracle. So whatever it is, it might be a healing of body. I believe in that. I believe also the mind that I have. God healed my whole attitude of being able to trust him when it looked like it was impossible. Do you ever pray and then things get worse? Well, if you're in that situation, things are getting worse at this moment, I would be willing to pray for you, because I want to tell you, God is on the case, and he wants to carry you. But he wants to give you a hope and a faith that'll believe him, even if it doesn't look like it's changing. He'll give you a faith to say, I'm going to trust you, Lord. Job said this. He says, even though God slay me, I'm still going to trust him. And we know that Job was restored completely, back with all the things that he'd lost. And so I encourage you with a hope and a blessing tonight. So thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. But your journey, whether you're a believer or not a believer at this moment, take encouragement that God is real and he's able to do amazing things, and that you might live for him. The Lord bless you.
Thank you, Jesus.
Thank you.